The clock on the wall of Montgomery County Courthouse ticked with agonizing slowness. Each second felt like an eternity to Detective Sarah Mitchell, as she watched 7-year-old Emma Rodriguez sitting motionless on the wooden bench outside courtroom 4B. The little girl's legs dangled above the floor, her white Mary Jane shoes swinging slightly with each shallow breath she took. In her lap, clutched with a grip so tight her knuckles had turned white, was a stuffed elephant, its gray fabric worn thin from years of nighttime cuddles, one button eye hanging by a thread. Emma hadn't spoken a single word in 87 days. Detective Mitchell had been counting. Every single day since that horrific night when Emma had witnessed something that shattered her innocent world into 1,000 silent pieces. The detective knelt down beside the bench, her knees cracking slightly as she brought herself to eye level with the traumatized child. "Sweetheart," Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper, gentle as a lullaby. "I know you're scared. I know what you saw that night terrified you so badly that the words won't come out anymore. But Emma, honey, I need you to understand something really important." Emma's brown eyes, enormous in her pale face, flickered toward the detective for just a moment before dropping back to the elephant in her lap. A single tear rolled down her cheek, following the same path as hundreds of others over the past 3 months. She didn't wipe it away. She didn't make a sound. She simply let it fall, splashing onto the elephant's worn trunk. "That bad man, the one who scared you, he's in that courtroom right now," Sarah continued, her own voice beginning to crack with emotion. "And if you can't find a way to tell the judge what you saw, what you know happened, he's going to walk out of here. He'll be free. Do you understand what that means?" Emma's mouth opened slightly. Her lips formed shapes, trying desperately to push sound through the barrier of trauma that had built itself like a wall in her throat. But nothing came, not even a whisper. Her small body began to tremble and fresh tears spilled down both cheeks now, faster and faster. Dr. James Chen, the child psychologist who had been working with Emma since the incident, stood a few feet away, his face etched with concern. He'd tried everything in his professional arsenal: play therapy, art therapy, EMDR, gentle exposure techniques. Emma could communicate through drawings and nods, could write simple words on paper, but actual speech, that remained locked behind a door that trauma had sealed shut. Inside courtroom 4B, Prosecutor Amanda Torres was running out of options. She could hear the muffled sounds of defense attorney Craig Sullivan's voice through the heavy wooden doors, already beginning his methodical dismantling of the state's case. Without Emma's testimony, the case against Marcus Webb rested on circumstantial evidence: footprints in mud, a blurry security camera frame, a dropped glove that could have belonged to anyone. Marcus Webb, the man who had terrorized the quiet suburban neighborhood of Oakwood Hills, sat at the defense table with an infuriatingly calm expression. He was 38 years old, with a face that looked like it belonged to someone's friendly neighbor, which, ironically, he had been. He'd lived just 3 doors down from the Johnson family whose home he'd invaded. He'd waved at them while mowing his lawn. He'd helped Mrs. Johnson carry groceries once. But Emma had seen the truth. She'd been having a sleepover at her friend Katie's house next door to the Johnsons that night. Unable to sleep, she'd been standing at the window of Katie's upstairs bedroom, looking out at the stars when she saw him. She'd watched the entire break-in unfold. She'd seen things that no 7-year-old should ever have to see. And then she'd watched the police arrive, watched the chaos, watched the Johnsons discover their home had been violated. The next morning, Emma stopped speaking entirely. "Ms. Torres is doing everything she can," Detective Mitchell said softly, reaching out to gently touch Emma's small hand. "But she needs your voice, sweetheart. She needs you to be brave for just a little while." Emma's hand jerked away as if burned. Her eyes went wide with terror, darting toward the courtroom doors. Behind those doors was not just Marcus Webb, it was a room full of strangers, all staring, all waiting, all expecting her to relive the worst night of her young life. Her chest began to heave with rapid, panicked breaths. Dr. Chen stepped forward quickly, "Sarah, she's having a panic attack. We need to." But before he could finish, Amanda Torres burst through the courtroom doors, her face flushed with urgency and something else. Hope, perhaps, or desperation masquerading as hope. In her hand was a manila folder. "I have an idea," she said breathlessly, crouching down beside Detective Mitchell. "It's unconventional. Sullivan will fight it tooth and nail. But I've been researching, and there's precedent." She opened the folder, revealing printed pages about courthouse facility dogs, specially trained therapy animals who help traumatized witnesses testify. Detective Mitchell's eyes widened. "You want to bring Ranger?" "Who's Ranger?" Dr. Chen asked. "My partner's facility dog," Sarah explained, her voice suddenly animated with possibility. "He's a golden retriever trained specifically for this. He's helped assault victims, children in custody battles, domestic violence survivors." Emma's head lifted slightly. Her tear-filled eyes showed a flicker of something. Interest, curiosity, it was hard to tell. "A dog," Dr. Chen said thoughtfully. "Actually, that could work. Animal-assisted therapy has shown remarkable results with selective mutism cases." "We need Judge Hartman's approval," Torres interrupted. "And we need it now. Court reconvenes in 20 minutes. Emma's hand loosened slightly on her stuffed elephant. Her lips moved again, and this time, though no sound emerged, the adults could read her lips clearly. "Dog." For the first time in 87 days, Emma Rodriguez showed the smallest hint of hope. It was enough. It had to be enough. Because 20 minutes was all they had to change everything. The sound of Craig Sullivan's fist hitting the polished mahogany table echoed through Judge Robert Hartman's chambers like a gunshot. Papers scattered, a coffee cup rattled in its saucer, and the tension in the room became thick enough to cut with a knife. "Absolutely not." Sullivan's face had turned an alarming shade of crimson, the veins in his neck standing out like cords. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is the most ridiculous thing I've heard in my 23 years practicing law. You want to bring a dog into my courtroom. A dog." Judge Hartman sat behind his massive oak desk, his weathered hands clasped together, fingers intertwined. At 62 years old, he'd seen just about everything in his 3 decades on the bench: false confessions, surprise witnesses, dramatic revelations. But this was new territory even for him. He removed his wire-rimmed glasses slowly, deliberately, and began cleaning them with a cloth from his desk drawer. It was a habit he'd developed over the years when he needed a moment to think. "Mr. Sullivan," he said in that deep, measured voice that had commanded order in courtrooms for 30 years, "I suggest you lower your voice and sit down." Sullivan remained standing, his expensive Italian suit straining slightly at the shoulders as his body language screamed defiance. "Your Honor, this is a blatant attempt to manipulate the jury's emotions. A child witness accompanied by a cute, cuddly dog. The defense might as well pack up and go home right now. It's prejudicial, it's inflammatory, and it's established legal precedent," Amanda Torres interrupted, stepping forward with her own folder of research. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what was at stake. "Courthouse facility dogs have been used in 37 states, Your Honor. The practice has been upheld by appellate courts repeatedly. People v. Chenault Spano in California, State v. Devin D. in Connecticut, State v. George Kale right here in Maryland." "Those were different circumstances," Sullivan shot back, whirling to face her. "Those cases involved victims, not witnesses. My client is presumed innocent, and parading a traumatized child into that courtroom with an emotional support animal is designed to make him look guilty before a single word of testimony is heard." "Your client is guilty," Torres said, her composure cracking slightly. "And that little girl sitting outside is too terrified to speak because of what she witnessed. She hasn't uttered a single word in 3 months, Mr. Sullivan. 3 months. Her childhood has been stolen because—" "That's enough." Judge Hartman's voice boomed through the chamber, silencing both attorneys instantly. He set his glasses back on his nose and fixed both lawyers with the stern gaze that had made countless attorneys think twice before speaking out of turn. Ms. Torres, your emotional appeals, while understandable, are not legal arguments. Mr. Sullivan, your theatrics are noted but unnecessary. The judge leaned back in his leather chair, which creaked under his weight. Through the tall windows of his chambers, he could see the autumn leaves falling from the old oak trees that lined the courthouse grounds. Somewhere out there, beyond these walls, a little girl sat in silence, trapped in her own mind by trauma. He thought of his own granddaughter, Lily, who was about the same age as Emma Rodriguez. What if it had been Lily? What if she had witnessed something that stole her voice? "Let me ask you something, Ms. Torres," Judge Hartman said quietly. "This dog Ranger, is it?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Walk me through exactly what we're talking about here. I want specifics, not emotional appeals. What is this animal trained to do, and what does the research actually say about effectiveness?" Amanda Torres opened her folder with renewed energy. "Ranger is a 3-year-old golden retriever, Your Honor. He's been trained for over 2,000 hours specifically as a courthouse facility dog by Canine Companions for Independence. He's not a pet or an emotional support animal. He's a highly trained professional working dog. His presence has been scientifically proven to lower cortisol levels, reduce heart rate, and decrease anxiety in traumatized witnesses." She pulled out a study, sliding it across the desk toward the judge. "This research from the University of California, Davis shows that children who testify with facility dogs present demonstrate significantly less distress, answer questions more completely, and show better memory recall. The dog doesn't sit with the jury. He stays with the witness, completely out of the jury's direct line of sight in most cases." "Most cases," Sullivan pounced on the qualifier. "But not all cases. Your Honor, the jury will see this child with a dog. They will see her petting it, finding comfort in it, and they will subconsciously associate my client with being the cause of her needing that comfort. It's Psych 101. "Your client is the cause," Detective Sarah Mitchell spoke up from her position near the door. She'd been standing silently until now, but the defense attorney's words had pushed her past her limit. "I've been a detective for 15 years, Your Honor, and I've never seen a child this traumatized by what they witnessed. Emma Rodriguez has nightmares every single night. She wakes up screaming, except she can't scream because she can't make sounds anymore. She draws pictures of what she saw, and they're absolutely heartbreaking. This isn't about manipulating anyone. This is about giving a child a fighting chance to tell the truth." Judge Hartman studied the detective's face. Sarah Mitchell had a reputation, tough as nails, honest to a fault, not prone to exaggeration or emotional manipulation. If she said the child was suffering, the child was suffering. "Mr. Sullivan," the judge said finally, "I understand your concerns about jury prejudice. However, I'm also bound by the interests of justice and the protection of witnesses, particularly child witnesses. The law allows for reasonable accommodations." Sullivan opened his mouth to object again, but Judge Hartman raised a hand, silencing him. "Here's my ruling," the judge continued, his voice taking on the formal tone of judicial decree. "I will allow the facility dog, Ranger, to accompany the witness. However, there will be strict conditions. The dog will be positioned so that the jury has minimal visual contact with it. I will give the jury explicit instructions that the presence of the dog is a therapeutic accommodation and should not be considered as evidence of anything. And Ms. Torres," he fixed the prosecutor with a hard stare, "if I see even a hint of you using that dog to play on the jury's emotions, I will remove it immediately and declare a mistrial. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, Your Honor," Torres said, relief flooding her voice. Sullivan slumped slightly, knowing he'd lost this battle. "Your Honor, let the record reflect the defense's strong objection." "So reflected," Judge Hartman said curtly. He glanced at the clock on his wall. "We reconvene in 15 minutes. Ms. Torres, I suggest you get that dog here immediately. And someone please tell that little girl," his voice softened almost imperceptibly, that she's about to make a new friend. As the attorneys filed out of his chambers, Judge Hartman turned to look out his window again. Something about this case had bothered him from the beginning. Marcus Webb seemed too calm, too confident, and now a child was too terrified to speak. In his gut, that instinct developed over 3 decades of hearing testimony and watching faces. He felt there was more to this story than anyone knew. He just hoped they'd get the chance to hear it before it was too late. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B swung open with a whisper of well-oiled hinges, and every head in the gallery turned in unison. The quiet murmur of conversation died instantly, replaced by a collective intake of breath. Walking through those doors, with the regal bearing of royalty entering a throne room, came Ranger, a magnificent golden retriever whose honey-colored coat seemed to catch and hold every ray of light filtering through the tall courtroom windows. Detective Sarah Mitchell walked beside him, her hand resting gently on the special handle of his service vest, a vest that proclaimed in bold letters, "Courthouse Facility Dog." But it wasn't the vest that captured everyone's attention. It was the dog himself. Ranger moved with the calm, measured confidence of an animal who understood his purpose. His dark brown eyes surveyed the room with gentle wisdom, taking in the rows of spectators, the jury box where 12 citizens sat with wide eyes, and finally, the small figure hunched in the witness waiting area. Emma Rodriguez. The moment Emma saw Ranger, something shifted in the atmosphere of the entire courthouse. It was as if the building itself had been holding its breath, and now, finally, exhaled. Emma's grip on her tattered stuffed elephant loosened. Her tear-stained face, which had been a mask of terror just moments before, transformed. Her eyes, those deep brown pools that had held nothing but fear and darkness for 87 days, suddenly flickered with something new. Light. Hope. Wonder. "Oh," Emma breathed, and though the sound was barely audible, it was the first vocalization she'd made in 3 months. Dr. James Chen, standing nearby, felt tears prick his eyes. Amanda Torres gripped her legal pad so hard her knuckles went white. Even Craig Sullivan, the defense attorney who'd fought so hard against this moment, found himself watching with reluctant curiosity. Ranger approached slowly, deliberately. His training was evident in every measured step. He didn't rush toward Emma like an excited pet. He moved like a professional, like a therapist approaching a fragile patient. When he reached the witness waiting area, he stopped about 3 feet away, sat down with perfect posture, and simply looked at Emma. His tail gave the smallest wag, not the wild, frantic wagging of a typical dog, but a gentle, patient rhythm that seemed to say, "I'm here, whenever you're ready." Emma's small hand reached out tentatively, trembling like a leaf in autumn wind. Her fingers stretched across the distance between them, and when they finally made contact with Ranger's soft, golden fur, something inside her seemed to crack open. Not break, crack open, like a seed splitting to allow new growth. She slid off the bench and onto her knees on the cold marble floor, and Ranger, sensing he had permission, closed the distance between them. He gently rested his large, noble head on Emma's lap, his warm weight a solid, comforting presence. Emma's small arms wrapped around his neck, her face burying into his fur, and her whole body began to shake with silent sobs. "It's okay, sweetheart," Sarah Mitchell whispered, kneeling beside them. "Ranger's got you. He's not going anywhere." Judge Hartman emerged from his chambers, saw the scene unfolding, and made a decision. "We'll take a 15-minute recess," he announced to the courtroom. "Let the child have some time with the dog." Those 15 minutes felt like 15 seconds to Emma and 15 hours to everyone else. But slowly, gradually, Emma's breathing steadied. Her tears dried. And when Amanda Torres finally, gently suggested it was time, Emma stood up with Ranger at her side and walked toward the witness stand with more courage than most adults could muster in a lifetime. The courtroom watched in absolute silence as the small girl climbed into the witness box, a chair that was too big for her, making her look even smaller and more vulnerable than she already was. A special arrangement had been made. Ranger would lie on a cushioned mat at the base of the witness stand, close enough for Emma to touch, but positioned so the jury's view of him was minimal. Judge Hartman leaned forward, his typically stern face softening in a way that surprised even the veteran court reporter who'd worked with him for 15 years. "Hello, Emma," he said in a voice so gentle it seemed impossible that it came from the same man who'd thundered order in this courtroom countless times. "My name is Judge Hartman. Do you know why you're here today?" Emma's hand reached down, finding Ranger's head. Her small fingers buried themselves in his soft fur. She nodded, just barely. "I need you to answer out loud, sweetheart, so the court reporter can write down what you say. Can you do that for me?" Emma's lips moved. Nothing came out at first. She tried again, her voice a whisper so faint it barely registered. "Yes." The word fell into the courtroom like a stone into still water, sending ripples through everyone present. Marcus Webb, who'd been lounging almost casually at the defense table, sat up straighter. His eyes narrowed, focusing on the little girl with an intensity that made several jury members uncomfortable. Amanda Torres stood, smoothing her blazer, and approached the witness stand with careful, measured steps. "Hi, Emma. I'm Ms. Torres. We've met a few times before, remember?" "Yes," Emma whispered again, slightly louder this time. "Emma, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to take your time answering them. If you need a break, you just tell me, okay? And Ranger is right there. You can pet him whenever you want." Emma's hand was already stroking Ranger's fur in a rhythmic, soothing motion. The dog's breathing was steady and calm, a metronome of peace in the tense courtroom. Torres started with easy questions. "Emma, how old are you?" 7. "And where do you go to school?" "Oakwood Elementary." "Do you have a best friend?" "Katie Johnson." Emma's voice grew slightly stronger with each answer. "Katie Johnson is your neighbor, isn't she?" "Yes, she lives next door to me." The jury leaned forward. This was going somewhere. Torres moved carefully, like someone navigating a minefield, building trust and comfort with each simple question before approaching the dangerous territory ahead. "Emma, do you remember the night of August 15th, 3 months ago?" Emma's hand stopped moving. Her eyes went wide. Ranger, sensing the change in her emotional state immediately, shifted slightly, pressing more of his warm body against her leg. Emma's voice caught, her breathing quickened. "Take your time, honey. Remember, Ranger's right there." Emma looked down at the dog. Ranger looked back up at her with those impossibly kind eyes. She took a shaky breath. "I remember. Can you tell us where you were that night?" "At Katie's house, a sleepover." "And what happened that night, Emma? What did you see?" Emma's face began to pale. Her chest started heaving with rapid, shallow breaths. Her mouth opened and closed several times, forming words that wouldn't come. The familiar wall of trauma was rising again, threatening to steal her voice once more. "Emma," Torres prompted gently, "what did you see?" The little girl's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Ranger, who seemed to understand her distress. He stood up on the mat, pressing his body more firmly against the witness stand, giving her all of his solid, comforting presence. "I saw," Emma's voice cracked like breaking glass, "I saw a man, and I saw." Her entire body went rigid. Her eyes, which had been focused on Amanda Torres, suddenly shifted. They moved across the courtroom, scanning the gallery, the jury, the defense table. She was looking for something, searching for something. And then she found it. Emma's breath stopped entirely. Her face drained of all color, becoming as white as the pages on the court reporter's desk. Her small hand, which had been stroking Ranger's fur, froze mid-motion. Her eyes locked onto something, someone in the gallery, and the terror that flooded her expression was so profound, so absolute, that several jury members gasped. "Emma," Dr. Chen stood up from his seat, concerned. "Emma, what's wrong?" But Emma couldn't answer. She was staring, transfixed, at something that had shattered whatever fragile courage she'd managed to build. Her finger began to rise, trembling violently, pointing at something across the crowded courtroom. Judge Hartman leaned forward, trying to see what had captured the child's attention. Amanda Torres turned, following Emma's pointing finger. Detective Mitchell's hand instinctively moved toward her weapon. And then Emma spoke. Her voice, no longer a whisper but a sharp, clear cry that cut through the stunned silence like a knife. "THAT dog." The courtroom exploded into chaos. Time seemed to fracture into 1,000 crystalline shards, each moment stretching and distorting as Emma Rodriguez's small arm extended across the courtroom like an accusation from the heavens themselves. Every eye followed the trajectory of her trembling finger, every breath held in anticipation. They expected her to point at Marcus Webb, the defendant sitting smugly at the defense table. They expected confirmation of what everyone already believed they knew. But Emma's finger wasn't pointing at Marcus Webb. Her finger, steady despite her trembling body, aimed directly at Officer Jake Reynolds, a decorated K-9 handler sitting in the third row of the gallery in his crisp police uniform, his German Shepherd Duke sitting obediently at his side. Reynolds was here as a spectator, a member of law enforcement showing support for the judicial process. His uniform was pressed to perfection, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He was the picture of authority and integrity. "THAT dog," Emma's voice, which moments ago had been barely a whisper, now rang through courtroom 4B with the clarity of a bell. "That's the dog that was there. That dog was with the bad man." The words hit the courtroom like a physical force. Gasps erupted from the gallery. Jury members leaned forward, confusion etched on their faces. Amanda Torres froze mid-step, her mouth falling open in shock. Craig Sullivan shot to his feet, his face a mixture of bewilderment and something else. Hope, perhaps, that this bizarre turn might save his client. "Order!" Judge Hartman's gavel cracked against the sound block once, twice, 3 times. "Order in this court." But the chaos had been unleashed. Officer Jake Reynolds stood up so abruptly his chair clattered backward onto the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot. His face, normally composed and professional, had transformed into a mask of red-faced indignation. "Your Honor," Reynolds' voice boomed with righteous fury. "This is absolutely insane. I have been a police officer for 15 years. I have served this community with honor and distinction. I don't know what this child thinks she saw, but—" "Officer Reynolds, sit down," Judge Hartman commanded, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority. "Everyone will remain calm and seated or I will clear this courtroom." Emma was sobbing now, but not the silent tears she'd shed for 3 months. These were vocal, desperate sobs as she pointed at Duke, the German Shepherd. "That dog, I remember the vest, the shiny letters. The police dog was there when the man broke in. I saw them both." Ranger, sensing Emma's extreme distress, stood up fully and pressed himself against the witness stand, whining softly, the first sound he'd made since entering the courtroom. His training kept him from leaving his position, but every fiber of his being strained to comfort the terrified child. Detective Sarah Mitchell's mind was racing at lightning speed. She'd reviewed every detail of this case 100 times, every witness statement, every piece of evidence, every timeline. Officer Jake Reynolds had been on duty that night. She'd seen his shift report. But he'd been on the other side of the county. His patrol logs showed him responding to a noise complaint in Riverside at the exact time of the break-in at the Johnson residence. Except, Sarah's hand moved to her phone, her fingers flying across the screen even as the courtroom continued to erupt around her. GPS data. Every patrol car had GPS tracking. Why hadn't she checked Reynolds' GPS data? Because he was a cop. Because it never occurred to her that a 15-year veteran with commendations for bravery would be involved. "Ms. Torres," Judge Hartman's voice cut through her thoughts, "do you have any knowledge of Officer Reynolds being present at the crime scene?" Amanda Torres looked like someone had struck her in the face. "No, Your Honor, Officer Reynolds wasn't. He's not a witness in this case. He's not mentioned in any reports. Because I wasn't there," Reynolds shouted, his composure completely shattered now. Duke, the German shepherd, began to stand up, agitated by his handler's emotional state. "This is ridiculous. Your Honor, this child is clearly traumatized and confused. German shepherds are common police dogs. She probably saw some K-9 unit on TV and now she's confused." "I saw your dog," Emma screamed, her voice raw with terror and anger. "I saw the vest with the shiny letters that said police. I saw you with the bad man. You had keys. They jingled. The dog sniffed at the door and you opened it with keys." The courtroom went completely silent. Even Judge Hartman seemed momentarily stunned into silence, because Emma's description was too specific, too detailed. The shiny letters on K-9 vests were reflective lettering visible at night. And keys, Marcus Webb had allegedly broken in through a forced window. But what if he hadn't? What if someone had let him in? Marcus Webb, who'd been sitting with his mouth agape, suddenly began to laugh. It was a hysterical, manic sound that made everyone in the courtroom turn to stare at him. "Finally," he shouted, jumping to his feet. "Finally someone believes it. Jake made me do it. He set the whole thing up." "Mr. Webb, sit down." Craig Sullivan grabbed his client's arm, trying desperately to silence him, but Webb yanked himself free. "No, I'm done protecting him. Jake Reynolds approached me 6 months ago. He said he knew I had a record, knew I needed money. He said he'd give me inside information about which houses to hit when the patrols would be away. He said his K-9 would make perfect cover. Who questions a police dog checking out a property?" The courtroom exploded again. Reporters in the gallery were furiously typing on their phones. Jury members looked at each other in shock. Judge Hartman's gavel sounded like machine gun fire as he tried to restore order. "Your Honor, my client is clearly having some kind of breakdown." Sullivan was desperately trying to salvage something, anything. "Your client just confessed to conspiracy with a police officer." Torres found her voice, shock giving way to prosecutorial instinct. "Your Honor, I move for an immediate recess and request that Officer Reynolds be detained for questioning." "On what grounds?" Reynolds demanded, but his voice had changed. The righteous indignation was gone, replaced by something else. Fear. His eyes darted toward the exit. "Nobody moves," Judge Hartman commanded. He looked at the bailiff. "Henry, secure that exit. No one leaves this courtroom until I say so." He turned to Detective Mitchell. "Detective, I suggest you make a phone call. Now." Sarah was already dialing. Her hands shook slightly as she pulled up the GPS records she'd ignored before. And there it was. The raw data loading on her screen told a story that made her stomach turn. Officer Jake Reynolds' patrol car, Unit 347, had been parked 2 blocks from the Johnson residence at 11:47 p.m. on August 15th, right in the window of the break-in. His written report said he was in Riverside, but the GPS didn't lie. "Your Honor," Sarah's voice cut through the chaos, steady and cold as ice. "Officer Reynolds' GPS puts him at the scene. He lied in his patrol report." The color drained from Jake Reynolds' face. For a long moment he stood there, frozen, as 15 years of service and respect evaporated in the span of a heartbeat. His eyes met Emma's across the courtroom. This tiny 7-year-old girl who'd been too terrified to speak, who everyone had thought was too traumatized to be reliable. And she'd been right. She'd been right all along. "I want my lawyer," Reynolds said quietly, his voice hollow. "I'm not saying another word without my lawyer." Duke, the German shepherd, whined softly, sensing his handler's distress, completely unaware that he'd been used as an unwitting accomplice in a crime. The dog had just been doing what dogs do, following his handler, trusting completely. He couldn't know that his presence, his official police vest, had been weaponized to make a burglary look like a routine patrol check. Judge Hartman sat back in his chair, looking suddenly older than his 62 years. In 3 decades on the bench, he'd seen corruption, he'd seen betrayal, he'd seen justice both served and denied. But this, a decorated officer using his badge and his K-9 partner to facilitate crimes, this was a new kind of betrayal. "This court is in recess," he said heavily. "Bailiff, escort Officer Reynolds to a holding room. Someone call Internal Affairs. Detective Mitchell, I want a full investigation started immediately." He looked at Emma, still trembling in the witness stand with Ranger pressed against her. "And someone please get that brave little girl something to drink. She just did what a roomful of adults couldn't do." As officers moved toward Reynolds, as chaos consumed the courtroom, Emma buried her face in Ranger's fur and cried, not from fear anymore, but from relief. She'd spoken. She'd told the truth. And finally, someone had listened. The holding room in the basement of Montgomery County Courthouse felt like a tomb. Officer Jake Reynolds sat in a metal chair bolted to the floor, his hands resting on the scarred table surface, no longer cuffed but knowing he wasn't free to leave. His pristine uniform, the same one he'd worn with pride for 15 years, now felt like it was suffocating him. Duke had been taken by another K-9 handler, and the absence of his partner made Reynolds feel more alone than he'd ever felt in his life. Through the two-way mirror, Detective Sarah Mitchell watched him with eyes that burned with betrayal and fury. She'd worked alongside Jake Reynolds for 7 years. They'd shared coffee on countless night shifts. She'd gone to his daughter's birthday party 2 years ago. She'd trusted him. "How long have you known him?" Lieutenant Marcus Chen stood beside her, his voice carefully neutral. Chen was with Internal Affairs, called in the moment Judge Hartman had declared the recess. He was a thin man with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. 7 years, Sarah said, her voice tight. "I would have sworn on my badge he was clean. I would have bet my life on it." "That's what makes these cases so hard," Chen said quietly. "The good ones who go bad, they're good at hiding it. They know all the tricks because they've been catching criminals for years." Sarah's phone buzzed. The forensics team had arrived at the Johnson residence, the original crime scene that everyone had thought was thoroughly processed 3 months ago. But now they were looking for new evidence. Dog hair, Jake Reynolds' DNA, anything that proved he'd been there. Inside the holding room, Reynolds sat motionless, staring at his hands. These hands had pulled 3 people from a burning car in 2018. These hands had performed CPR on a drowning child in 2020, bringing her back to life. These hands had served the community, protected the innocent, upheld the law. These hands had also helped Marcus Webb rob 7 houses over the past 6 months. The door opened and Sarah Mitchell entered, carrying a laptop and a thick file folder. She sat down across from Reynolds without a word, opening the laptop to reveal a map covered in red dots. GPS data. Each dot represented a location where Reynolds' patrol car had been, locations that didn't match his written reports. "I haven't requested my lawyer yet," Reynolds said automatically, the words every cop knows to say. But there was no fight in his voice, just exhaustion. "Then don't talk," Sarah said coldly. "Just listen, because I'm going to tell you exactly what we found in the last 45 minutes. She turned the laptop screen toward him. "August 15th, the Johnson residence. Your GPS puts you 2 blocks away at 11:47 p.m. Your written report says you were in Riverside responding to a noise complaint. That noise complaint doesn't exist. I called the Riverside precinct. No record of it." Reynolds stared at the screen, his jaw clenching. Sarah clicked to another screen. "July 22nd, the Martinez residence was robbed. Your GPS puts you 3 blocks away at the time of the break-in. Your report says you were on routine patrol in the downtown area. Security footage from a convenience store downtown. You're not on it during the time you claim you were there." Another click, another date. June 18th, the Patel residence. June 3rd, the Bloomfield estate. May 15th, the Anderson townhouse. Each location appeared on the map in damning red dots. "Should I keep going, Jake? Because we've found 7 incidents where your GPS data contradicts your reports. 7 robberies, all in wealthy neighborhoods, all during your shift, all when you claim to be somewhere else. Reynolds' hands began to tremble. A single bead of sweat rolled down his temple. But here's the thing that really breaks my heart. Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. That little girl up there, Emma Rodriguez, she's been living in silence for 3 months because of what you did. She was so traumatized that she couldn't speak, couldn't tell her parents good night, couldn't laugh with her friends, couldn't sing happy birthday at her own birthday party in September. All because you, someone she was raised to trust, someone wearing a badge that's supposed to mean protection, you betrayed everything that badge stands for. The dam broke. Jake Reynolds' face crumpled, and a sound escaped his throat that was half sob, half gasp. His head dropped into his hands. I owed money, he whispered, so quietly Sarah almost didn't hear him. God help me, I owed so much money. To who? Sarah demanded. Bookies, bad people. I had a gambling problem, had it for years. My wife didn't know. Nobody knew. I was good at hiding it, just like I was good at hiding everything else. The words poured out now like water from a broken dam. I was $127,000 in debt. They were threatening my family. They said they'd hurt Rachel, hurt my daughter Emily. Sarah's expression didn't soften. So you decided to become a criminal instead of asking for help. I didn't plan it. Reynolds looked up, his eyes red and desperate. Marcus Webb, I arrested him 2 years ago for possession. When he got out, he approached me, said he knew about my debts. These people talk, they know things. He said he just needed information, just patrol schedules, which neighborhoods had good targets. Easy money, he said, just information. But it wasn't just information, was it? Sarah pulled out another document. Because we found your fingerprints at 3 of the scenes, not just near them, inside them. Reynolds closed his eyes. It started with just information, but then Webb said the jobs would go faster if I helped. If I used Duke as cover, a K9 doing a property check looks normal. Nobody calls 911 when they see a police dog sniffing around. And I had access to master keys for some of the buildings through the property management companies we work with for security checks. The confession rolled out in agonizing detail. How Reynolds would scope out homes during his regular patrols, noting security systems and resident patterns. How he'd provide Webb with inside information about which houses had valuables and minimal security. How 7 times he'd actually accompanied Webb on the robberies, using Duke and his uniform as camouflage. The Johnson job was supposed to be our last one, Reynolds said, his voice hollow. I'd finally paid off enough of my debt that the threats stopped. I told Webb after this one I was out. We were so careful we watched the house for weeks. We knew they were at a charity gala until midnight. We had a 2-hour window. But you didn't know about Emma, Sarah said. We had no idea any kid was next door. Reynolds looked like he might be sick. I swear to God if I'd known. When I heard the next day that there was a witness, that it was a child, that she'd stopped talking, his voice broke completely. I've been carrying that for 3 months. Every time I saw Duke, every time I put on this uniform, I thought about what I'd done to that little girl. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Text from the forensics team, found Reynolds' DNA on Johnson backdoor handle, found Duke's fur on hallway carpet. Jackpot. She showed Reynolds the text. It's over, Jake. We have your GPS data, your DNA, your fingerprints, and now we have your confession. And Marcus Webb is already cooperating with the prosecution. He's giving us everything in exchange for a reduced sentence. Reynolds nodded slowly, defeat written across every line of his face. What happens to Duke? Duke goes to another handler. He's a good dog who deserves better than what you gave him. And Emily, my daughter, she's only 12. She doesn't deserve to have a father in prison. Sarah stood up, gathering her laptop. You should have thought about Emily before you decided to betray your badge. That little girl upstairs didn't deserve what you did to her either, but that didn't stop you. She moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Jake, the fact that you feel guilty, that doesn't change anything. Emma Rodriguez will carry what you did to her for the rest of her life. Your guilt doesn't balance that scale. She left Reynolds alone in the holding room with his regrets and his ruined life. Upstairs, in a victim services room, Emma sat with Ranger, drinking apple juice and eating crackers. Dr. Chen sat with her, gently asking how she felt. "Lighter," Emma said softly, her small hand stroking Ranger's fur. "I feel lighter, like something heavy fell off my chest." Through the window, she could see the autumn leaves falling from the courthouse oak trees, golden and red and orange, drifting down to earth like promises of renewal. Emma took another sip of juice and allowed herself the smallest smile. The bad man with the police dog couldn't hurt anyone anymore. And she, tiny Emma Rodriguez, the girl who couldn't speak, had been the one to stop him. The interrogation room on the third floor of the courthouse buzzed with a different energy than the one where Jake Reynolds sat in defeated silence. Here, Marcus Webb leaned forward eagerly, his hands animated as he spoke, his public defender Craig Sullivan sitting beside him with a resigned expression. Across the table sat Amanda Torres, Lieutenant Marcus Chen from Internal Affairs, and a stenographer whose fingers flew across her machine, capturing every word. Marcus Webb was singing like a canary, and the song he sang was one of corruption, desperation, and betrayal that ran deeper than anyone had imagined. "Jake approached me first," Webb said, his words tumbling out rapidly. "I know what I said in court. I was panicked, trying to shift blame, but the truth? Yeah, he came to me. It was about 8 months ago. I was working at Murphy's auto shop, trying to stay clean after my last stint. He pulled up in his patrol car one night after closing." Torres leaned forward, her pen poised over her legal pad. "What did Officer Reynolds say to you?" "He said he'd been watching me, said he knew I had skills, breaking and entering security systems, the whole 9 yards from my previous convictions. He said he had a business proposition." Webb laughed bitterly. "A business proposition, like we were talking about opening a restaurant or something." "What was the proposition?" Chen asked, his voice level but his eyes sharp. Webb ran his hand through his thinning hair. "He said he had access to information, rich neighborhoods, patrol schedules, houses that were easy targets. He said with his knowledge and my skills, we could pull off jobs that would never be traced back to us. He'd use his position to make sure patrols were away from our targets, and if anyone saw his K-9 unit near a house, they'd just think it was routine police work." Sullivan, Webb's attorney, interjected. "For the record, my client is providing this testimony with the understanding that the prosecution will consider a reduced sentence in exchange for his full cooperation." "That's correct," Torres confirmed. "Continue, Mr. Webb." Webb nodded. "The first job was in May, the Anderson townhouse in Oakwood Hills. Jake gave me the security code, said he'd gotten it from a property management contact, but I figure now he must have stolen it during some official visit. He told me exactly when to go in, how long I had, everything. I gave him 40% of what we got. That was the deal. I did the physical work, he provided the intel and protection." "Protection?" Chen's eyebrow raised. "He'd position himself nearby during the jobs. If anything went wrong, if someone came home early, he'd radio me on a burner phone. And if cops were called, he'd be the first responder, could stall things, give me time to get out." Webb's voice took on a tone of grudging admiration. "It was brilliant, really. Who suspects the cop who's investigating the crime?" Torres felt sick. "How many jobs total?" 7. Anderson, Bloomfield, Patel, Martinez, Silverstein, Cho, and finally Johnson. Webb counted them on his fingers like a grocery list. "We pulled in about $340,000 worth of jewelry, electronics, cash. I got 60%, Jake got 40%. He said he had debts to pay off, gambling debts, he told me after a few jobs. Said some scary people were after him." "Tell us about the Johnson residence," Torres said. "August 15th. What happened that night?" Webb's expression darkened. That was supposed to be the last one. Jake said once we pulled off the Johnson job, he'd be clear of his debts and we'd part ways. The Johnsons were at some charity thing at the Marriott downtown. Jake had confirmed it, even saw them leave. We had until at least midnight. What time did you arrive? 11:45 p.m. Jake met me 2 blocks away. He always came in his patrol car with Duke. It was part of the cover. Anyone seeing a K-9 unit in a nice neighborhood at night just thinks, oh, police are checking the area. Good. It was perfect camouflage. Chen pulled out a photo, the Johnson residence. Walk us through what happened. Webb pointed at the back door in the photo. Jake had a key. I don't know how he got it, but he had keys to a lot of places. Said it was through police partnerships with property management companies. We went in through the back. Duke came with us. Jake said leaving him in the car might draw attention. The dog was trained, completely obedient. He'd just sit wherever Jake told him to sit. How long were you inside? Maybe 20 minutes. We knew what we were looking for. There was a safe in the master bedroom. Jake had a device that could crack it, some law enforcement tool he'd stolen. We got about $15,000 in cash, some jewelry, a Rolex. Webb paused, his voice dropping. We had no idea anyone saw us. The neighbor's house was dark. All the lights were off. But Emma Rodriguez was there, Torres said softly, at a sleepover in an upstairs window. Webb's face paled. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know a kid was watching. When I heard on the news that there was a witness, that it was a 7-year-old who'd stopped talking. He put his face in his hands. I've done a lot of bad things in my life, but I never wanted to hurt a kid. Never. Yet you let Officer Reynolds terrify that child for 3 months, Chen said coldly. You let her suffer rather than come forward. Jake said if either of us talked, we both went down. He said no one would believe a kid anyway, that she was too traumatized to be a credible witness. He said we just had to wait it out. Webb looked up, his eyes haunted. But sitting in that courtroom today, seeing her point at Duke, hearing her voice when she finally spoke, I couldn't do it anymore. That little girl was braver than I ever was. Torres slid a document across the table. This is a list of all 7 residences. I need you to walk us through each one, dates, times, what was taken, exactly how Officer Reynolds assisted, every detail. For the next 3 hours, Marcus Webb provided a masterclass in how a corrupt cop, an experienced criminal, had terrorized wealthy Montgomery County neighborhoods. He described how Reynolds had access to police databases that showed which residents were on vacation, how Reynolds had stolen evidence room keys to borrow, burglary tools that were untraceable, how Reynolds had even filed some of the police reports himself, deliberately leaving out details that might lead to his own involvement. By the time Webb finished, the sun had set outside the courthouse windows. The stenographer's hands were cramping, and Amanda Torres had enough evidence to bury Jake Reynolds so deep he'd need a mining permit to see daylight again. Downstairs in the main courtroom, Judge Hartman reconvened the proceedings. The gallery was packed now. Word had spread throughout the courthouse and beyond. Media trucks lined the streets outside. The corruption of a decorated police officer was major news. Jake Reynolds was led into the courtroom in handcuffs now, no longer in his police uniform but in civilian clothes. His badge and gun had been seized. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, as if the removal of his uniform had stripped away whatever confidence he'd once possessed. Jake Reynolds, Judge Hartman's voice carried the weight of 30 years of judicial authority. You are hereby charged with 7 counts of burglary, 7 counts of conspiracy to commit burglary, 7 counts of abuse of authority, tampering with evidence, filing false police reports, and corruption of office. How do you plead? Reynolds stood, his lawyer beside him. For a long moment he was silent. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Guilty, Your Honor, guilty to all charges." A collective gasp went through the courtroom. His attorney hadn't advised a guilty plea. There were deals to be made, negotiations to be had. But Reynolds was done running. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking. He turned toward where Emma sat with her parents in the gallery, Ranger beside them. "Emma, I'm so sorry for what I did to you. I'm sorry for taking your voice, for making you afraid. You're the bravest person in this courtroom, and I'm the coward." Emma stared at him, her small hand clutching Ranger's fur. She didn't speak, didn't nod. She just stared at the man who'd stolen 3 months of her childhood. And then, with a quiet dignity that made every adult in the room feel humbled, she turned away from him, burying her face in Ranger's golden fur. She didn't need to forgive him. She didn't owe him anything. Judge Hartman set Reynolds' sentencing for 60 days out, denying bail. As Reynolds was led away in handcuffs, Emma whispered something to her mother. "What did she say?" Detective Mitchell asked, kneeling beside them. Emma's mother smiled through her tears. She said, "The bad dog man is gone now. Can Ranger come visit me again?" Sarah Mitchell laughed and cried at the same time. "Sweetheart, Ranger can visit you whenever you want." 6 months had passed since that extraordinary day in courtroom 4B when Emma Rodriguez found her voice again. The leaves that had been falling that autumn day had long since turned to winter snow and then to spring flowers. Now, on a warm April morning, the same courtroom was packed once again, but this time the atmosphere was entirely different. Today was sentencing day. Emma sat between her parents in the front row of the gallery, her posture straight and confident in a way that would have seemed impossible half a year ago. She wore a yellow dress her grandmother had made specially for this day, yellow, because it was Ranger's favorite color, or at least that's what Emma told everyone. The stuffed elephant that had been her constant companion during those dark months now sat on a shelf at home, retired but honored. In its place, Emma held a small golden retriever plush that Detective Mitchell had given her, a reminder of the real hero who'd helped her heal. Ranger himself sat beside her, his official therapy dog vest on, his presence as calm and reassuring as always. Over the past 6 months, he'd become a regular visitor to the Rodriguez household. Sarah Mitchell brought him by twice a week, and Emma had slowly, gradually begun to speak more freely. First in whispers, then in normal tones, and finally, just last month, she'd laughed out loud for the first time since August, a sound so beautiful her mother had cried. Dr. James Chen sat a few rows back, watching his young patient with undisguised pride. In his 30 years as a child psychologist, he'd seen trauma take many forms and healing follow many paths, but Emma's journey had been extraordinary. The combination of time, therapy, family support, and Ranger's unconditional presence had worked a kind of miracle. Judge Robert Hartman entered the courtroom, and everyone rose. He'd presided over thousands of cases in his 3 decades on the bench, but this one had affected him differently. Perhaps it was because he had a granddaughter Emma's age. Perhaps it was the profound betrayal of trust that Jake Reynolds represented. Or perhaps it was simply witnessing the raw courage of a 7-year-old child who'd brought down a corrupt cop when the entire system had failed to notice. "Please be seated," Judge Hartman said, settling into his chair. His eyes found Emma immediately, and the stern judge allowed himself the smallest smile. "Before we proceed with sentencing, I understand we have some victim impact statements." Amanda Torres stood. "Yes, Your Honor. The Johnson family has prepared a statement, and Emma Rodriguez has also prepared something she'd like to share with the court." "Emma Rodriguez," Judge Hartman raised his eyebrows. "Is the young lady comfortable speaking before the court?" Emma stood up, and every eye in the courtroom turned to her. 6 months ago, this moment would have been impossible. 6 months ago, she couldn't speak at all. Now, she walked to the front of the courtroom with Ranger at her side, carrying a piece of paper with words she'd written herself in careful, rounded cursive. The judge gestured to a microphone that had been set up at a comfortable height for her. Emma looked out at the crowded courtroom, at reporters with notebooks, at police officers including several from Jake Reynolds' old unit who'd come to see justice served, at her parents whose eyes were already glistening with tears, and finally at Jake Reynolds himself, sitting at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit. Reynolds looked like he'd aged 20 years in 6 months. His hair had gone gray at the temples. His face was gaunt. When Emma's eyes met his, he looked down at the table, unable to hold her gaze. Emma unfolded her paper with hands that only trembled slightly. Ranger pressed against her leg, a solid presence of support. "My name is Emma Rodriguez," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I'm 7, almost 8 now. I wrote this myself, but Dr. Chen helped me with some of the big words." A ripple of gentle laughter moved through the courtroom. Judge Hartman smiled. "I was scared of police dogs after that night," Emma continued, reading carefully. "I was scared of police cars. I was scared of the dark. I was scared of everything. I couldn't talk because every time I tried, I remembered seeing the dog with the shiny vest and the man with keys, and I remembered being so scared that I couldn't move. I stood at Katie's window and I watched them, and I knew it was wrong, but I was too scared to call for help." Her voice wavered slightly, and she reached down to touch Ranger's head. He looked up at her with those warm brown eyes, and she found her strength again. "I didn't talk for 87 days. I missed my birthday party and I couldn't sing. I missed Halloween and I couldn't say trick or treat. I missed Thanksgiving, and I couldn't tell my mom and dad that I loved them, even though I wanted to so much it hurt my heart." In the gallery, Emma's mother pressed a tissue to her eyes. Her father's jaw was clenched tight, fighting back emotion. "But then I met Ranger," Emma's voice grew stronger. "And Ranger taught me something really important. He taught me that not all dogs are bad, just like not all people are bad. Officer Reynolds made a bad choice, lots of bad choices, but Ranger makes good choices every day. Ranger helps people who are scared. He sits with people who are sad. He doesn't hurt anyone, he only helps." Emma looked up from her paper now, speaking from her heart rather than her prepared words. "I was angry at Officer Reynolds for a long time. I was angry that he made me so scared I couldn't talk. I was angry that he used a dog, a good dog who was just doing what dogs do, to do bad things. Duke didn't know he was helping with crimes. Duke just loved his handler and did what he was told. That makes me sad for Duke." Several jury members from the original trial, sitting in the gallery as observers, nodded in agreement. "Dr. Chen taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to be okay even when you remember." Emma looked directly at Judge Hartman now. "I'm learning to be okay. I can talk again. I can laugh again. I'm not scared of police dogs anymore because I know that most police officers are good people who help keep us safe. Officer Reynolds was different. He made bad choices." She turned finally to look at Reynolds, who had tears streaming down his face. "I don't know if I forgive you yet," Emma said simply. "Dr. Chen says that's okay, that forgiveness takes time and I don't have to forgive you if I don't want to. But I want you to know that I'm not going to let what you did ruin my whole life. I'm going to be okay. And I hope that wherever Duke is now with his new handler, he's happy, because none of this was his fault." Emma folded her paper and walked back to her seat with Ranger beside her. The courtroom was absolutely silent except for the sound of tissues being pulled from purses and the quiet sniffles of people trying not to cry openly. Judge Hartman removed his glasses and wiped his eyes, something no one in that courtroom had ever seen him do in 30 years on the bench. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, "in my 3 decades as a judge, I have heard thousands of victim impact statements. I have heard from people who lost loved ones, people who lost their life savings, people who suffered terrible violence. But I have never heard testimony that moved me the way yours just did." He cleared his throat, struggling for composure. "You are the bravest person I have ever had in my courtroom, and I include every police officer, every soldier, every firefighter I've ever met. Because you, at 7 years old, found the courage to speak when speaking was the hardest thing in the world. You found the courage to tell the truth when the truth was terrifying. And you found the courage to heal when healing seemed impossible." Judge Hartman put his glasses back on and turned to face Jake Reynolds. His emotional moment passed, replaced by the stern authority of law. "Jake Reynolds, please stand." Reynolds stood shakily, his lawyer beside him. "You were a police officer for 15 years, Judge Hartman said, his voice now hard as granite. "You took an oath to protect and serve. You wore a badge that represents honor, integrity, and justice, and you betrayed every single thing that badge stands for." The judge pulled out his prepared statement, but then set it aside. "I had a whole speech prepared about the nature of your crimes, the betrayal of public trust, the damage to community relations. But I think Miss Rodriguez said it better than I ever could. You made bad choices. You used your position, your access, and even your K-9 partner to terrorize the community you swore to protect. And worst of all, you traumatized a 7-year-old child so profoundly that she lost her voice for 3 months." Judge Hartman's gavel was in his hand now, ready to pronounce sentence. "For the charges of burglary, conspiracy, corruption of office, tampering with evidence, and abuse of authority, I hereby sentence you to 15 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for 10 years. You will forfeit your pension, your benefits, and you are permanently barred from any form of law enforcement work. Additionally, you will pay restitution to all victims, totaling $340,000, plus punitive damages to the Rodriguez family, specifically in the amount of $50,000. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the courtroom like thunder. "Furthermore," Judge Hartman continued, "I am ordering that your case be used as a training example in every police academy in Maryland. Future officers will learn from your mistakes. They will learn what happens when someone betrays their oath, and they will learn about the courage of Emma Rodriguez, who brought you to justice." He looked at Emma one more time. "Young lady, this community owes you a debt we can never fully repay. Thank you for your courage. Thank you for your voice. And thank you for teaching all of us what true bravery looks like." As Reynolds was led away in handcuffs, Emma leaned against Ranger and whispered, "We did good, didn't we?" Ranger's tail wagged softly. Yes, they had done very good indeed. 2 years after that fateful day in courtroom 4B, Emma Rodriguez stood before the Maryland State Legislature in Annapolis. She was 9 years old now, taller and more confident, though she still had the same warm brown eyes and the same gentle spirit that had captured a courtroom's heart. But everything else about her had transformed. The legislative chamber was grand and intimidating. Marble columns reached toward a domed ceiling painted with historical scenes, and rows of legislators in dark suits sat at polished wooden desks, all eyes focused forward. Television cameras lined the back wall. This was where laws were made, where the future of Maryland was shaped. And today, a 9-year-old girl was about to change history. "Members of the legislature," the speaker announced, "we have a special witness today testifying in support of House Bill 1847, the Courthouse Facility Dog Act. Please welcome Miss Emma Rodriguez." Emma walked to the witness table with her head held high. Beside her, as always, walked Ranger. The golden retriever was older now, with a few gray hairs around his muzzle, but his eyes were as kind, and his presence as steady as the day he'd first entered that courtroom. Detective Sarah Mitchell walked behind them, her hand resting protectively on Emma's shoulder. Not because Emma needed protection anymore, but because Sarah couldn't quite break the habit of watching over the little girl who'd become like family. Emma adjusted the microphone and looked out at the sea of legislators. 2 years ago, this moment would have been impossible. 2 years ago, she couldn't speak at all. Now, she was about to address the most powerful governing body in the state. "Good morning," Emma began, her voice clear and strong. "My name is Emma Rodriguez. I'm 9 years old and I'm from Montgomery County. 2 years ago, I witnessed a crime that scared me so badly that I stopped talking for 87 days. I couldn't tell anyone what I saw. I couldn't tell my parents I loved them. I couldn't ask for help. I was trapped inside my own fear." She paused, her hand reaching down to touch Ranger's head. He looked up at her with those patient, loving eyes. Then I met Ranger. He's a certified courthouse facility dog, trained to help people like me, people who are scared, people who have seen terrible things, people who need a friend to help them be brave. Ranger didn't just help me talk again. He saved my life. In the gallery, Emma's parents sat with tears already streaming down their faces. Beside them sat Judge Robert Hartman, retired now but still passionate about justice. Amanda Torres, who'd been promoted to chief prosecutor, sat with Dr. James Chen. Even Marcus Webb was watching on a television in the minimum security facility where he was serving his reduced sentence, his rehabilitation counselor nodding how intently he followed Emma's testimony. House Bill 1847 would require every courthouse in Maryland to have access to trained facility dogs for witnesses who need them, Emma continued, reading from notes she'd prepared with Dr. Chen's help. Right now, only some counties have these programs. That means kids in other parts of Maryland who are scared like I was don't have the help they need. That's not fair. Senator Patricia Williams, the bill's sponsor, smiled from her seat in the front row. She'd been working on this legislation for a year, ever since reading about Emma's story in the newspaper. I know some people worry about the cost, Emma said, addressing the concern that had been raised in committee hearings. But I looked up the numbers with my mom. It costs about $50,000 to train a facility dog. That sounds like a lot. But you know what costs more? When kids can't testify because they're too scared. When criminals go free because witnesses won't talk. When people like Jake Reynolds, the bad police officer who scared me, get away with crimes because the system didn't help victims speak up. Emma's voice grew more passionate now, the shy little girl completely gone, replaced by an advocate who understood the power of her own story. In the 2 years since Ranger helped me, Montgomery County's courthouse facility dog program has helped 47 other witnesses testify. 47 people who might not have been able to talk found their voices because a dog sat beside them and made them feel safe. Those 47 testimonies led to 31 convictions. 31 criminals are in jail because facility dogs help people be brave enough to tell the truth. She pulled out a folder containing letters and drawings. I brought letters from some of those people. There's a letter from Mrs. Chen. She was 68 years old when she witnessed a robbery at her store. She was too scared to testify until she met Ranger. There's a drawing from Tommy, who's 6, who saw his dad hurt his mom and was too scared to tell anyone until a facility dog named Max sat with him. There's a letter from Sarah, she's 15, who was able to testify against someone who hurt her because a dog named Bella made her feel safe. Emma held up the folder. These are the people House Bill 1847 will help, kids like me, adults like Mrs. Chen, anyone who's scared but needs to be brave. Delegate Marcus Thompson, known for being skeptical of new spending programs, leaned forward. Miss Rodriguez, I'm moved by your testimony, but I have to ask, couldn't people just bring their own pets for comfort? Emma shook her head firmly. No, sir. Regular pets aren't trained for this. They might bark or get scared or distracted. Facility dogs like Ranger go through thousands of hours of training. They learn to stay calm no matter what. They learn to sense when someone is getting upset and how to help them. They learn to ignore distractions. A pet dog is wonderful, but a facility dog is a professional. It's like asking if someone could operate on themselves instead of going to a doctor. You need a professional. Several legislators nodded, impressed by her logic. I also want to tell you about what happened after I testified, Emma continued. Judge Hartman said my case should be used to teach police officers about courage and integrity. It has been. I got letters from 3 different police academies telling me that future officers learn about what happened. They learn about how Jake Reynolds betrayed his oath, but they also learn about how the system worked when I finally found my voice. She looked directly at the legislators now, making eye contact the way Dr. Chen had taught her. But the system only worked because Ranger was there. Without him, I don't know if I ever would have talked. And if I hadn't talked, Jake Reynolds would still be a police officer. He'd still be robbing people. He'd still be using his badge to hurt the community instead of help it. Emma's voice softened. I'm not going to be scared my whole life because of what happened. I'm going to be okay. But I'm okay because I got help. Because Ranger was there, because Dr. Chen was there, because people like Detective Mitchell and Ms. Torres and Judge Hartman cared enough to try something different. She held up a photo, the famous image that had appeared on the front page of newspapers across Maryland, showing Emma in the witness stand with her small hand buried in Ranger's golden fur, the moment right before she'd found her voice again. Every kid in Maryland deserves what I got. Every adult who's scared deserves that chance to be brave. Please pass House Bill 1847. Please give other people the same chance Ranger gave me. Please make sure that being scared doesn't mean criminals go free. Emma gathered her notes and concluded, "Thank you for listening to me. 2 years ago, I couldn't talk at all. Today, I'm talking to all of you about changing the law. That's what courage looks like. That's what Ranger taught me. And that's what this bill will teach other people, that being brave is possible when you have help." The chamber erupted in applause. Legislators stood, clapping. People in the gallery were crying openly. Even the cynical reporters in the press box were wiping their eyes. 3 weeks later, House Bill 1847 passed the Maryland House of Delegates 138-1. It passed the Senate 45-0. And on a sunny May morning, Governor Sarah Preston signed Emma's law into effect in a ceremony at the State House, with Emma and Ranger standing beside her. "This law will save lives," Governor Preston said, her hand on Emma's shoulder. "It will give voice to the voiceless. It will help ensure that justice is served. And it exists because one brave little girl refused to let fear win." That evening, Emma sat in her bedroom at home. Ranger sprawled on the floor beside her bed, as he'd been allowed to do on special occasions. On her shelf sat her old stuffed elephant, retired but honored, a reminder of the scared little girl she'd once been. "You know what I want to be when I grow up?" Emma asked Ranger, scratching behind his ears. Ranger's tail thumped against the carpet. "I think I want to be either a veterinarian so I can help dogs like you, or maybe a detective like Miss Sarah, or maybe a lawyer like Miss Torres." Emma smiled. "Or maybe I'll train therapy dogs. I could teach other dogs to help scared people the way you helped me." Her mother appeared in the doorway. "Emma, honey, there's someone here to see you." Emma went downstairs to find a young woman standing in the living room, someone she didn't recognize. The woman was in her early 20s, with red-rimmed eyes and a nervous smile. "Hi, Emma," the woman said softly. "My name is Jessica. 3 years ago, I was in a car accident. I saw everything, but I was too scared to testify against the drunk driver who hit us. He walked free because I was too afraid. When I heard about you and Ranger, about how you found your voice, I finally went back to the police. There's going to be a new trial, and this time I'm going to testify. And I'm going to have a facility dog with me because of the law you helped pass." Emma hugged Jessica, this stranger who'd become a sister in courage. "You're going to do great. The dog will help you. You just have to be brave for a little bit and then it gets easier." After Jessica left, Emma returned to her room. She picked up her old stuffed elephant, looking at its worn fabric and its hanging button eye. She held it close one more time, remembering all those silent days, all that fear, all that darkness. Then she placed it back on the shelf, not with sadness but with honor. "Thank you for being there when I needed you," she whispered to the elephant. "But I don't need to hold you anymore. I have Ranger now, and I have my voice." Ranger woofed softly in agreement. Emma Rodriguez, the girl who'd been too scared to speak, had found more than her voice. She'd found her purpose. She'd found her courage. She'd found proof that even the smallest person could change the world. All it took was 4 paws, a golden heart, and the bravery to speak truth, even when speaking was the hardest thing in the world. The end.